Don't let them see you. Emily Carter heard the whisper behind her, and for the first time that night, she realized the voice wasn't coming from the people chasing her. Rain swept across downtown Chicago, turning the sidewalks into shining ribbons beneath the streetlights. Emily pulled her worn gray coat tighter and kept running. Her breath came fast. Her shoes were soaked through. She had no money for a cab, no working phone, and nowhere safe to go. All she had was a small silver pendant clenched tightly in her hand. She didn't know why the strangers wanted it. She only knew that they had followed her for nearly 6 blocks. Keep moving, she whispered to herself. Her apartment was 3 miles away, but home no longer felt safe. Every few seconds, she glanced over her shoulder. The street behind her looked empty. Too empty. She turned onto a narrower road lined with old brick buildings and closed storefronts. A delivery truck rumbled somewhere in the distance. Then the city seemed to go silent. Emily stopped. Her heart hammered. She had reached the end of the street. A tall iron gate blocked the sidewalk ahead, and there was nowhere else to go. She looked left. A locked door. Right. A blank brick wall. Behind her, footsteps echoed softly against the wet pavement. One step, then another. Emily closed her fingers around the pendant. It had belonged to her grandmother, who had given it to her 3 years earlier with only one warning. If anyone ever asks where you got this, tell them you lost it. Emily had never understood those words. Tonight, she finally wished she had. The footsteps grew closer. She backed toward the iron gate, trying to steady herself. Then something strange happened. The rain stopped falling around her. Not everywhere. Just there. A perfect circle of dry air seemed to surround her. Emily looked up. A man stood beneath the black awning of the building behind her. She had not heard him arrive. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black coat, his dark hair untouched by the rain. His skin was unusually pale, almost luminous beneath the streetlight. But it was his eyes that made Emily forget how to breathe. They were a cold, stormy, gray, ancient, watchful. You've been running for 6 minutes and 42 seconds, he said calmly. Emily stared at him. Who are you? The man stepped forward, and the atmosphere seemed to change with him. Someone who knows exactly what they are looking for. His gaze dropped to the pendant in her hand. Emily instinctively covered it with her palm. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Recognition. Where did you get that? He asked. Emily swallowed. It was my grandmother's. Silence followed. The man looked toward the empty street, then back at her. Emily Carter, he said quietly. Her eyes widened. She had never told him her name. How do you know who I am? He took one measured step closer. Because, Emily, your grandmother once made a promise to my family. The castle had been silent for years, but that night, it seemed to remember how to breathe. The vampire king stood beside the tall window, his pale face reflected faintly in the glass, his long curly hair resting over his shoulders as moonlight filled the room. Behind him, the young woman remained near the doorway, still trying to understand what she had witnessed only moments before. She had expected darkness when she entered his world. She had not expected sorrow. You should leave before midnight, he said quietly. His voice carried no threat, only a strange urgency. She looked toward the clock on the wall. 11:47. Why? She asked. The vampire king did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward an old wooden table where a single silver key rested beside a faded photograph. The photograph showed the castle many decades earlier, surrounded by people who appeared happy, ordinary, and completely unaware of the secrets hidden behind those stone walls. He picked it up carefully. There was a promise made here long ago, he finally said. And tonight, someone believes that promise is about to be broken. The young woman stepped closer. What promise? His expression changed. For the first time, she saw something beneath his calm exterior that looked almost like fear. The promise that no human would ever be brought into this castle again. The words settled between them. She realized that her presence was not an accident. Someone had wanted her there. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, a distant bell began to ring. One slow note, then another. The vampire king turned toward the sound, his expression suddenly alert. They know you are here. She felt her heart race. Who are they? He looked at her for a long moment before answering. People who have spent years waiting for me to make one mistake. He placed the silver key into her hand. It was cold, but not frightening. There is a room beneath the west tower. Go there and lock the door. She stared at the key. And what will you do? He gave her a faint, almost tired smile. I will find out why they came tonight. She wanted to argue, but another bell echoed through the castle. This time, the sound seemed closer. The young woman closed her fingers around the key and turned toward the corridor. Before she disappeared into the shadows, the Vampire King spoke again. Whatever you hear, do not open that door until I return. She stopped and looked back. His pale face was illuminated by the moon, his eyes carrying a secret he still refused to reveal. Then she walked away, unaware that the room beneath the West Tower contained an answer to a question she had not yet learned to ask. And as midnight finally arrived, the castle doors opened by themselves. The castle doors opened into the midnight air, yet no footsteps followed. The young woman stood alone in the corridor, holding the silver key tightly as a cold draft moved through the ancient halls. Behind her, somewhere beyond the great entrance, the Vampire King had disappeared from sight. She wanted to trust his instructions, but every instinct told her that something inside the castle was changing. She hurried toward the West Tower, following the narrow staircase that curved upward before descending again into darkness. The key seemed strangely heavy in her hand. When she reached the hidden door beneath the tower, she found a small symbol carved into the stone. It was the same symbol she had noticed in the faded photograph upstairs. She pressed the key against the lock. With a quiet click, the door opened. Inside was a small chamber filled with old books, dusty portraits, and shelves covered with sealed wooden boxes. At the center stood a round table beneath a single hanging lamp. On the table was a letter addressed simply to the one who was never meant to arrive. She stared at the words, unable to move. Then she slowly opened it. The handwriting was elegant and careful. It explained that the castle had once belonged to a family sworn to protect a secret capable of changing the balance between humans and vampires. The secret had been hidden for generations because both worlds had agreed that neither should interfere with the other. But the final paragraph made her breath catch. It said that one day, a human would enter the castle by choice, carrying a memory that did not belong to her. She lowered the letter. She had never told anyone about the strange dream that had followed her since childhood, the dream of standing beneath the same moonlit tower while a man with pale skin watched from a distant window. Suddenly, she heard footsteps outside the chamber. She froze. The sound stopped directly beyond the door. Then came the Vampire King's voice. Do not open it. Relief passed through her, but something in his tone made her hesitate. You told me to come here, she answered. There was a long silence. I told you to find the room, he replied. I did not know what you would find inside. She looked again at the letter. You knew about me before tonight. The silence returned. Finally, he said, I knew there was someone who would come. I did not know it would be you. The door remained closed between them. Then the young woman noticed something written on the bottom of the letter. 3 words appeared beneath the signature, words that made everything she believed about her past suddenly uncertain. Remember who you were. She looked toward the door. What does that mean? The Vampire King answered softly. That is the question I have been trying to protect you from. Some memories are not forgotten. They are waiting for the right person to return. The young woman stared at the words until they seemed to blur beneath the dim light. On the other side of the door, the Vampire King remained silent. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then she slowly unfolded the letter again, searching for anything that could explain the strange certainty growing inside her. Open the door, she said. I need the truth. The lock turned from the other side, and the door opened. The Vampire King stepped into the chamber, his pale face calm, but his eyes carrying a sadness she had never seen before. He looked at the letter in her hands. You were here once, he said. She shook her head. I have never seen this place. Not in the life you remember. His words left her speechless. He walked to the table and gently touched the faded photograph. Years ago, someone brought a child to this castle. She stayed only one night. Before sunrise, her memories of the castle were sealed away. The young woman felt a strange warmth in her chest. That child was me. He nodded. Yes. She looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and confusion. Why would anyone do that? Because your family discovered something they were never supposed to know. He opened one of the wooden boxes on the shelf and removed a small journal wrapped in faded cloth. Your mother believed that humans and vampires did not have to remain separated by fear. She believed there could be trust between the two worlds. The young woman touched the cover. Where is she now? The Vampire King lowered his eyes. She disappeared many years ago. The answer carried no drama, only grief. The young woman opened the journal and found several pages filled with familiar handwriting. She recognized it immediately. It was her mother's. The first page contained a message written for her. My daughter, if you ever find this journal, then the castle has called you back. She read the words again, struggling to understand how a message written so long ago could describe the exact moment she was living through. The next page contained a drawing of the silver key. Beneath it was a sentence that made her look toward the Vampire King. Trust him, even when he tells you to leave. She knew you, the young woman whispered. She trusted you. The Vampire King looked toward the window. Your mother trusted me. With one promise. I promised to keep you away from this castle until you were ready. And now, she asked. He turned back to her. Now I believe someone else has decided that you are ready. Before she could ask who, a soft sound echoed from somewhere above them. The old castle clock began moving again after years of silence. The hands pointed toward 1 in the morning. The Vampire King looked toward the ceiling, and for the first time, his composure disappeared. We are not alone anymore. The clock continued to move, each quiet tick spreading through the castle like a message meant for someone who had been waiting a very long time. The young woman closed her mother's journal and looked at the Vampire King. Who is here? She asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the narrow staircase leading out of the chamber. We need to leave this room, he said. Why? Because this room was designed to preserve memories, not to keep secrets hidden forever. They stepped into the corridor, and the door closed behind them. The castle felt different now. The air seemed warmer, and faint golden light appeared beneath several doors that had remained dark when she first arrived. The young woman followed him toward the main hall, still holding the journal close to her chest. You said my memories were sealed, she said. Can they come back? The Vampire King stopped beside a tall window. They already are. She looked at him. How do you know? Because I remember what happened the last time you stood here. His voice softened. You were afraid of the dark, so your mother gave you a small silver bell. She told you that whenever you felt lost, you should ring it. The young woman suddenly remembered something. A faint sound from childhood. A small bell beside her bed. A woman's voice telling her that she was safe. She closed her eyes, and another memory surfaced. She saw herself standing in this very hall, holding her mother's hand. Beside them stood the Vampire King, younger in appearance, but carrying the same quiet expression. You were there, she whispered. I was, and my mother left me with you. He nodded. For one night. The memory faded as quickly as it had appeared. She opened her eyes, unsettled by how real it had felt. Then she noticed something unusual. At the far end of the hall stood a door she had never seen before. It was framed by pale stone and marked with the same symbol from the photograph. The Vampire King followed her gaze. That door was never supposed to open again. But it is open now. He looked toward it. Yes. A soft glow came from inside, illuminating the floor. The young woman stepped forward, but he gently raised his hand. Wait. She stopped. What is behind it? He took a slow breath. A place where your mother left the final part of her message. She stared at him. Then we should go inside. For a moment, he seemed uncertain. Then he nodded. Together, they crossed the hall. As they approached the doorway, the silver key in her hand began to glow faintly. The door opened wider without anyone touching it. Inside was a circular room filled with mirrors, each one reflecting a different moment from the young woman's childhood. She saw a little girl running through a sunny field. She saw her mother smiling beside a small house. Then she saw herself standing in this castle many years earlier. But in that reflection, she was not alone. A second figure stood beside her. The young woman stared at the mirror, unable to speak. The Vampire King looked at the reflection and whispered, "That is the memory you were never meant to remember." The reflection showed a younger version of the young woman standing beside someone she did not recognize. The figure appeared calm, with familiar eyes and a gentle expression, but there was something about the way they stood together that suggested a connection deeper than friendship. The young woman stepped closer to the mirror. Who was that? The Vampire King remained beside her, watching the reflection carefully. Someone your mother trusted. That does not answer my question. He looked at her through the glass. It is your father. The words seemed to silence the entire room. She stared at the reflection, searching the face for something familiar. She had grown up believing that her father had simply disappeared before she was old enough to remember him. Her mother had rarely spoken about him, and whenever the young woman asked questions, the answers had always been gentle but incomplete. Now, for the first time, she could see him clearly. Why was his memory hidden from me? She asked. Because your mother believed you deserved a normal life, the Vampire King said. She wanted you to grow up without the weight of the world she had discovered. Another mirror began to glow. The image changed. Her mother stood inside the same castle, holding the silver bell from her childhood. The young woman watched silently as her mother placed the bell on a table and spoke to someone beyond the reflection. If she ever returns, tell her that her father did not abandon her. The young woman's eyes filled with tears. What happened to him? The Vampire King looked down. He left to protect your mother and you. Did he ever come back? No. The answer was quiet, but it carried a sadness that made the room feel colder. The young woman touched the mirror. Then how did you know where he went? The Vampire King hesitated. Because he asked me to watch over you. She turned toward him. All these years. She studied his face, realizing that the strange sense of familiarity she had felt around him was not imagination. He had been part of her story long before she remembered meeting him. Then the silver key in her hand became warm. A hidden panel opened beneath the largest mirror, revealing a small compartment containing a folded piece of paper. She carefully removed it. Her father's handwriting covered the page. My daughter, if you are reading this, then the memories have begun to return. Do not be afraid of what you discover. Your life was never meant to belong to one world alone. She read the final sentence twice. Your mother and I chose the Vampire King because he was the only one we trusted to protect the bridge between our worlds. The young woman slowly lowered the letter. A bridge, she whispered. The Vampire King looked toward the mirrors. Your family was not protecting a secret. He paused. Your family was protecting a possibility. Suddenly, the mirrors began to brighten one after another, revealing scenes from different years. In every reflection, humans and vampires stood together in quiet conversation, separated by old fears but connected by a hope that had never completely disappeared. The young woman understood then why she had been brought back. She was not returning to uncover the past. She was returning because the future was waiting for her. The mirrors continued to glow, filling the chamber with memories that seemed to stretch across generations. The young woman stood at the center, overwhelmed by the realization that her family had spent years protecting an idea that could change everything. The Vampire King remained beside her, watching the reflections with quiet concern. What happens now? She asked. That depends on what you choose. She turned toward him. Why me? Because the bridge cannot exist without someone willing to cross it. He walked toward the largest mirror, where her parents appeared together beneath the same moonlit sky. Your mother believed that fear was the only thing keeping two worlds apart. Your father believed trust could replace it. They wanted you to grow up believing that people should be judged by their choices, not by what they are. The young woman looked at the reflection of her mother. Then why did they hide everything? Because they knew the truth could become dangerous if revealed before the world was ready. She lowered her eyes to the silver key. And now you think the world is ready? No, he answered. I think the world is waiting. A soft sound came from the corridor. The young woman turned toward the doorway. A figure stood beyond the chamber, partially hidden by the shadows. The person did not enter. Instead, they placed something on the floor and stepped back. The Vampire King approached carefully and picked up the object. It was a small envelope sealed with the same symbol that appeared throughout the castle. He handed it to the young woman. Her name was written across the front. She opened it and found a single page. The message was from her mother. If you have reached this room, then someone has already opened the door to the old world. Do not follow fear. Follow the truth. Beneath the message was a map of the surrounding valley, with a small circle drawn around an abandoned railway station nearly 12 miles from the castle. What is there? She asked. The Vampire King studied the map. The first meeting place between your parents and the people who believed humans and vampires could live without fear. People are still meeting there. I do not know. He looked toward the dark corridor. But whoever left this envelope wants us to find out. The young woman folded the map. Then we go together. He hesitated. You may not like what you discover. She looked directly at him. I have spent my entire life knowing only half of my own story. I am ready to hear the rest. A faint smile appeared on his face. Then we leave before sunrise. They walked through the castle together, carrying the journal, the letters, and the silver key. Outside, the night remained quiet beneath a wide American moon. The road toward the abandoned station disappeared into the valley, but neither of them turned back. 12 miles away, an old clock inside the forgotten station suddenly began to tick. Someone was waiting there, holding another letter from the past. The road to the abandoned railway station was quiet beneath the fading night sky. The young woman sat beside the Vampire King in an old black car that moved steadily through the valley, while the first hints of dawn appeared beyond the distant hills. Neither spoke for several minutes. The journal rested on her lap, and the silver key remained in her hand. Finally, she looked toward him. "Did my parents ever come here together?" "Many times," he answered. "They believed this place could become the beginning of something new." "Did it?" He glanced toward the road ahead. "Not yet." The station appeared just before sunrise. It stood at the edge of a small town, surrounded by tall grass and abandoned tracks. The building had clearly been empty for years, but a warm light shone through one of its windows. The young woman stepped out of the car and looked at the station. "Someone is inside." The Vampire King nodded. They entered through an unlocked side door. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dust. A large clock hung above the waiting room, its hands frozen at exactly 6 o'clock. On a wooden bench sat an elderly woman with silver hair and a blue coat. She looked up as they entered. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then her eyes settled on the young woman. "You have your mother's eyes." The young woman stopped. "You knew my mother?" "I did more than know her. I helped her protect you." The Vampire King remained near the doorway, watching quietly. The elderly woman reached into her coat and removed a small envelope. "Your mother asked me to keep this until the day you returned." The young woman accepted it with trembling hands. The envelope contained a photograph of her parents standing beside the Vampire King outside the station many years earlier. Behind them were several people from both worlds, smiling as if they had finally discovered a reason to hope. On the back of the photograph was a date and a short message. The first gathering was only the beginning. The young woman looked at the elderly woman. "What happened after this?" "Fear happened," she replied. "Rumors spread. People became uncertain. The gathering ended, and everyone returned to their separate lives." She paused before adding, "But your parents never abandoned their belief." The young woman opened the second page inside the envelope. It contained a list of names. Some belonged to humans. Others belonged to vampires. At the bottom was a final name that made her look at the Vampire King. His name was written there. "You were part of this from the beginning," she said. He nodded. "I promised your parents that I would keep the hope alive." The elderly woman stood and walked toward the old clock. She reached behind it and pressed a hidden switch. A section of the wall opened, revealing a narrow passage. "Your mother told me that when you came back, you would need to see what was hidden beneath the station." The young woman looked at the dark passage, then at the Vampire King. He offered no warning this time. He simply said, "We have come too far to turn away now." Together, they stepped inside. Behind them, the old clock began moving again. 6 o'clock became 6:01. And, somewhere deep beneath the station, another clock answered. The passage beneath the station descended into silence, with only the sound of their footsteps echoing through the narrow stone corridor. The young woman walked beside the Vampire King, holding the silver key in one hand and her mother's journal in the other. Behind them, the hidden door closed quietly, leaving the elderly woman and the station above. After several minutes, the passage opened into a vast underground chamber. The walls were covered with old photographs, handwritten notes, and maps showing places across the country. At the center stood a large wooden table surrounded by empty chairs. The young woman stopped. This was a meeting room. The Vampire King nodded. "Your parents called it the Circle Room." She moved closer to the table. Several names were written across its surface, including the names of people she had never heard of. Some were marked with a small silver symbol. Others had been crossed out with a single line. She looked at the Vampire King. "What does this mean?" "Those who believed in your parents' vision joined the circle. Those who lost faith eventually left." She traced her fingers over one familiar name. Her mother's name was written near the center. Beside it was another name, her father's. Then she noticed something unexpected. Her own name appeared beneath theirs. "They knew I would come back." "They hoped you would," he replied. At the far end of the chamber stood a tall wooden cabinet. The young woman noticed the same symbol carved into its doors. She placed the silver key into a small opening. The cabinet unlocked with a soft click. Inside was a single glass container holding a folded letter. She carefully removed it and recognized her mother's handwriting. "My daughter, if you are reading this beneath the old station, then the time has finally arrived." The young woman took a slow breath and continued. "You may believe that your family spent your childhood protecting you from the truth. That is only part of the story. We were also protecting the truth from those who were not ready to understand it." The letter explained that the circle had never been created to control either world. Its purpose was to create a place where humans and vampires could meet without fear, suspicion, or old divisions. But the circle needed someone who belonged to neither side completely. Someone who could understand both worlds without being ruled by either one. The young woman looked up. "That is why they chose me." The vampire king nodded. "You were born human, but your family gave you something more important than a connection to either world. They gave you a choice." The final lines of the letter were shorter. "Your father believed you would someday become the keeper of the circle. Your mother believed you would choose a different path. We both agreed that the decision must always be yours." The young woman folded the letter. For the first time, she understood that nobody had brought her back to the castle or the station to force her into a destiny. They had brought her back so she could decide whether the old dream deserved another chance. She looked at the vampire king. "What happens if I say yes?" He smiled gently. "Then we begin again." She looked around the chamber, at the photographs of people who had once believed the impossible could become real. Then she placed the silver key on the table. "Then let us begin." Above them, the station clock reached 7 in the morning. Sunlight entered through the old windows. And beneath the quiet town, a promise that had waited for years finally found someone willing to carry it forward.